Now, as the leaders, respectively, of the Justice Department's Environmental and Natural Resources Division and the Civil Rights Division, Ignacia and Tom have inspired their teams, as well as their colleagues across the department, really to make certain that environmental justice efforts are a top priority. Now, many of you already are working closely with Ignacia as well as with Tom. And I know that everyone here today will benefit from their perspective as well as from their expertise. Finally, I want to thank each of you for your participation in this forum and for your partnership in meeting the environmental justice goals that we all share. The contributions that you are providing in states and municipalities, in tribal governments and federal agencies, in the nonprofit sector and the academic communities are leading the way towards a new chapter in our nation's environmental justice history. Not only are you helping to drive breakthrough changes, you are finding new ways to strengthen collaboration, which is the key strategy, I believe, in creating and maintaining healthy, sustainable communities. Now, in a few minutes, you're going to hear from Ignacia and from Tom about some of the specific ways that the Department of Justice is working to advance our environmental justice mission. And it is that for us. This is a mission. And I want all of you to know that at every level of the department, all across the 94 United States Attorney's offices, as well as what we call Main Justice here in Washington, D.C., this work is a top priority. For me, it's also a personal calling. One of my great honors as Attorney General is the opportunity to extend and to expand the work that my late sister-in-law, Vivian Malone Jones, began decades ago. In 1963, she was one of two black students who stepped past Governor George Wallace to integrate the University of Alabama. In 1965, she became that university's first African-American graduate. And she soon moved here to Washington, D.C., where she spent her entire career in public service. Her first job was in the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, and she ended her career at the EPA, where she served as its very first director of environmental justice. And in the meantime, she helped raise the woman who is now my wife. And if you know Sharon, to do both of those things at the same time, that says a lot about Vivian. But Vivian, like all of you, refused to accept the fact that our nation's environmental problems and threats were being heaped disproportionately on America's most vulnerable communities. And like all of you, she was unwilling to sit on the sidelines where there were needs to be met and there were wrongs to be righted. Now, of course, we can all be proud of and encouraged by the progress that has been made in recent decades. Our nation has taken critical steps to protect our water, air, land, and endangered and protected species, as well as our natural resources. We have improved public health, and we have improved worker safety, and we have made critical strides in securing nuclear power facilities and ensuring the cleanup of hazardous waste sites. Along the way, we have learned that Title VI and the National Environmental Policy Act are really powerful tools in our ongoing struggle. And today, we are seeing the Justice Department's Environmental Justice Initiative has the potential to transform lives and also to strengthen communities, work that you will hear about in just a few minutes. However, despite all the good work being done and the advancements that have been made, the reality is, the sad reality is that we have not come far enough. Today, minority and low-income families are the most likely Americans to live near hazardous industrial pollution sites or to have a landfill proposed in their community. Their neighborhoods are more likely to have polluted water and polluted soil. Their children are more likely to breathe polluted air and suffer from asthma. This is unacceptable. This is simply unacceptable in 21st century America, and it is unconscionable. We are much better as a nation than this. But through the aggressive enforcement of federal environmental laws and every community, I believe that we can, and I know that we must change this status quo. Dr. Martin Luther King, who really was in some ways the father of our nation's environmental justice movement, may have put it best when he declared, and this is a phrase that we all know, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's why the Justice Department has integrated our environmental justice goals into all of our enforcement efforts and our comprehensive strategic plans. And that's why I've called on every U.S. Attorney's Office throughout the country, all 94, to do the same, and to start thinking about environmental justice as a civil rights issue. By examining environmental requirements in conjunction with our civil rights laws, I am confident that we can do a better job of ensuring fairness, advancing justice, and making certain that the most vulnerable among us are not left out, left behind, and left to suffer disproportionately. Everyone in this room is in a unique position to contribute to this work. Everybody in this room can help in this effort and to help combat the threat and the devastating consequences of environmental injustice. So as you listen to this panel and as you participate in today's discussion, I ask you to think about the specific ways that you can take action in pursuit of the goals that we all share. And I urge you to consider ways that you can carry on the efforts of Dr. King and my beloved late sister-in-law, Vivian Malone Jones. So today I believe that we can build a future that lives up to their vision and that is also worthy of future generations. In this work, government leaders are relying on you, and we will continue to look for ways to support you and to collaborate with you. In our nation's ongoing struggle to ensure environmental justice, I am proud to count all of you as partners and as colleagues, and I look forward to what we can and what we will accomplish in the future. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Leslie Fields. I am the National Environmental Justice Director for the Sierra Club here in Washington, D.C., and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and I want to thank all of you for coming. And it seems like every time there is an EJ meeting, when you have to come to Washington, you do have to brave many things. You have to brave the elements. You have to brave so much going on, and we really appreciate you being here. I want to thank Ms. Sutley. I want to thank everyone in the Interagency Working Group, particularly Administrator Jackson, and particularly appreciate the very, very informative and important remarks by General Holder just now. And Ms. Canales, Susie, we hear you. We hear you. And what we're going to do is that, with the panelists' permission, I think I don't feel I need to make any other remarks other than what the General has just said. I think that what we could probably just do now is go straight into questions from the audience and have as much time as possible for questions from the audience, from the community, people who have spent their time and dime to get here, if that's all right with the panelists. And in that way, you could weave in the work that you're doing. You know, we want to hear about what the Obama administration is doing on legal enforcement, regulatory compliance, and the great legal work that's going on since the past 2 years. So we could start that, and with the microphones going again from left to right, and understand my position. I have to rein in the lawyers, all right? So, you know, this is it's a daunting task, but I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to try to get so we all hear about some of these solutions that are actually occurring in communities, and hear about some of the issues that you want to bring forth to the great panelists here. Their bios are included. We're certainly not going to read the bios, but I want to remind you that it really is historic because we have Assistant Attorney General Ignacio Moreno of the Environment and Natural Resources Division of the Department of Justice. We have Cynthia Giles, who's Assistant Administrator for the Office of Enforcement Compliance of Assurance of EPA. We have Assistant Attorney General Tom Perez, who's the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Division. We have Greg Nadeau, the Deputy Administrator for the Federal Highway Administration, the Department of Transportation. We have Carolyn Young, who's the Executive Director of Communication Technology at TriMet. And so really it's exciting, it's an important meeting, and we look forward to your questions, and we will try as much as possible to keep things on time so that we have time for everyone. And yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say that to add to all of the challenges, Tom Pettis and I were stuck at the gate. We weren't cleared for a long time. Luckily, I got here really early because I wanted to hear some of the earlier panels and was able to get away earlier. So I got in, but he is out there with Scott Fulton, who's the general counsel of EPA, and we're trying to get them in here. They came early, just like I did, so we were freezing out there. But anyway, I got a head start on them, but they're here. They wanted to be here early, and we're hoping to get them into the room. So just wanted to say that.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh, I was about to say, and then we also have Distinguished Professor of Law, Eileen Ghana, from the University of New Mexico School of Law. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Robert Bullard, and I direct the Environmental Justice Resource Center at Clark Atlanta University. And I think this is historic in having this meeting, but history can only take us so far. I think the frustration that were voiced by Susie Canales from Corpus Christi is a lingering frustration that exists in many communities that are impacted directly by environmental assaults. And since the panel was on energy, on green jobs and clean energy and sustainability, I think it's important to understand while the nation and our policymakers talk about going green and clean energy, communities like Corpus Christi and other communities are still being bombarded with dirty industry. As the nation goes green, communities of color are being pushed on with dirty coal-fired power plants that are on the drawing boards, that are being proposed as we talk about renewables and green. As we talk about green energy, TVA and other power companies are pushing toxic coal ash in communities of color and low-income communities. This is real while we're talking about this stuff. So we should emphasize the fact that this is a very important meeting. But when these folks go back home, they're having to deal with these proposals and fighting these state agencies, environmental agencies that don't protect them. And so a lot of the communities are looking to the federal government to do the things that our state environmental agencies won't do. Let's be real. I'm not a lawyer, so you don't have to rein me in. I don't have any minutes, and I got a chance this afternoon to say the same thing, but I just couldn't sit here and while things were not said, you know, I am a strong supporter of the EPA. And EPA has done a great job in moving the environmental justice agenda where it was not being dealt with before. But I do think that EPA, if this forum was organized by EPA and EPA had the lead in organizing, I think it would be very different. Not to be too critical, but I am going to be critical. CEQ has no experience in working with our communities, injustice communities, and they should have known. You should have known that if you get us in a room, that we will flip the agenda. You should have known that. Thank you very much. Oh, one last point. On the green job, the last panel. Green job, that should be expanded beyond green collar to talk about green careers. We need to be training young people, people of color, to do the technology, the science, and the math, and those new jobs that are going to be created so that we can compete with the rest of the world. Green collar jobs are great, but we need to have the science and the high-powered kinds of training. And I work on an HBCU, Historically Black College University, and we have been in the business of doing that for a long time with little money. Little money. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bullard. I want to recognize that Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Tom Perez did get through, and he's here with us. Thank you so much.
I arrived at 11:25, and I'm here at noon.
Okay, can we? Come-
Good morning. My name is Dr. Shelby Wilson, University of South Carolina. I'm here on behalf of one of my mentors, Mr. Omega Wilson, who's not able to be with us today. He's with the Western Revitalization Association, a community-based organization in Mebane, North Carolina, that submitted an administrative complaint to block the 118 bypass in Mebane, North Carolina over 10 years ago. And the issue that I want to raise is, how is the EPA, in regards to Omega's communities and other communities that are impacted by environmental injustice, and I actually like to present a couple other terms. I think EJ is too nice of a term. Communities that are impacted by environmental slavery, communities that are impacted by environmental oppression, who've been bombarded, as Dr. Bullock said, who've been burdened by these issues. What legal frameworks are going to really be implemented to take these administrative complaints that are backlogged right now, that haven't been addressed in the last 10 years or so, 12 years, and what other sort of legal frameworks, going beyond sort of the national frames that we have, and using some of the human rights frames that are out there too, because we're not even talking about that body of law that's out there to allow us to really get at these issues. These are human rights issues. So it's not just civil rights, it's human rights. So we have to really, to fight environmental oppression, to fight environmental genocide, to fight environmental slavery, we need to take Title VI, this executive order, these human rights frameworks out there to really get at these issues. And I don't think, like I said, we made progress, I don't want to be too critical, but I think there needs to be more work done to do that. And also, as it relates to having lawyers involved in the process, there are many community groups who don't have access to lawyers. So when you have government agencies, industries that have their lawyers, when community groups go into the meeting, they're naked. They need lawyers too. So if you got your lawyers, where are my lawyers at? So what efforts are the EPA going to take? What efforts are the DOJ going to take to make sure communities have their lawyers too, who can be the soldiers and be on the front lines to help those communities be able to activate, to engage, and be able to stop, block, and improve, prevent, mitigate, what verb you want to use, to make sure they have sustainability and healthy communities. So that's my question, comment. Thank you.
How do you want to,
Well, why don't we?
do you want to hear from some folks and then we can respond, or do you want to go one by one? How do you want
I'll
to
do
do this?
well, one more, and then we'll group them. Okay. Yes, Dr. Wright.
I'm Dr. Beverly Wright, Director of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice at Dillard University in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I just wanted to raise something that's of real concern for those of us who live in the Gulf Coast, but specifically to the city of New Orleans, where we're watching what we call disaster capitalism really take hold and is oppressing our people in all kinds of ways, but specifically as it relates to environmental pollution. We're now being faced with having to fight a gasification plant that they want to put, of course, in a neighborhood that's 85% African American, right under the high rise, where we hear there could be vapor plumes and all kinds of other things happening. We're starting to feel like we might have a hard time fighting this. We've asked EPA, for example, to look into the permitting process to see if we could get some response from them on whether or not, this thing is safe. All of our research basically shows that it isn't, but there's so little research out there that it's almost as if EPA can't make a statement because they don't have data. So we become the guinea pigs for something that's extremely dangerous. We don't know how to fight this. We're trying to fight it through the city. They're talking about waste to energy. They're that kind of process where they're going to turn waste to energy, which of course sounds good if it's brought in as an alternative energy kind of facility. We are just extremely concerned. We need some help in fighting this kind of unproven technology that they want to put on us. And of course, the reason for it is Katrina and the debris, and we don't have a comprehensive waste management plan in the city.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. Any one of you want to start addressing the first
Sure.
question?
Thank you very much for those comments, and Dr. Bullock, certainly, we didn't expect you to sit quietly, and we expected to hear from you, and it's great to do so. all the points that have been made so far, very well taken. I mean, the situation of disproportionate impact that we see around the country today is built up over a long period of years at many levels of decisions, federal, state, and local. And it's going to take a lot of hard work to reverse this direction and to really make a serious advancement of environmental justice. We are trying to be doing that work on the ground. Real results is what we're trying for. We're working on rules, writing rules. A lot of these facilities are cited under existing regulations. Regulations is where we make this environmental statutes real on the ground. Through permitting. Permits are where the rules meet community. And in many communities, this is a very important area. We're trying to work hard, work with states to figure out how we look at local impacts, especially cumulative impacts, in the permits that authorize these facilities, and in enforcement. Enforcement is vital to making sure that the communities that are overburdened with pollution, that action is taken to redress that. So, you know, we don't have the time here. I'd be happy to go into with individual folks about many of the enforcement cases and the permits and the regs that we have changed and have been effectively changed by our focus on environmental justice. And I'm sure many of you know Administrator Jackson, and you heard her speak today. When she says something is a priority and it's going to get done, it's going to get done.
I'd just like to, sorry, Tom.
Go ahead.
I'd just like to add to the mention of enforcement that Cynthia listed. Critically important, and that's where the Environment and Natural Resources Division comes in on the judicial side of enforcement. EPA certainly has its administrative enforcement authorities. But when we want, the government is the we here, we want to file a lawsuit in court, it gets referred over to our division, and then we work with EPA, and then we bring a civil action. I have someone I'd like to introduce you to, because I want you to remember us, and I want you to make sure, I want to leave here having you have a voice in our division, and you can contact us. But let me introduce Patrice Sims. Patrice is a nationally known expert on environmental justice issues. I stole him away from Howard University, and I cajoled and brought him over. One of the best decisions that I have made. A lot of you know Patrice. You know of his commitment, and I hope you know of mine. I started working on environmental justice issues in February 1994 when then President Clinton, signed the executive order. Coming back to the department after, I left after 7 years, one of my top priorities. Someone mentioned access to lawyers, which was the issue that I wanted in particular to address. We consider ourselves a nation's environmental lawyers. You'll hear the Attorney General talk about how he is the people's lawyer. That's what we're thinking too. Okay, we are the people's lawyers. We're enforcing environmental laws to ensure that all Americans, not just the affluent, all Americans enjoy a clean environment, safe drinking water. Your kids can play in the playground and you don't have to be worried sick about what chemicals are out there. That's our focus. Now, one of the things that we have not traditionally done, because we get our cases referred to us and we have broad powers under environmental laws, existing laws, to address these pollution issues. One thing we haven't done is we haven't sent our lawyers out into the community to have that one-on-one contact. There are challenges to doing that, of course, because there's a lot of confidentiality when we're trying to establish a case, get our proof. But we are working with the Community Relations Service, with others in the department, with EPA. Cynthia and I, we're partners. We see each other on a regular basis, I think once a month, to plot and plan, okay, how we're going to do our work, how we're going to advance the agenda so that it's an inclusive agenda so that we don't leave anybody behind. And I'm working very closely with Tom Pettis. We just had a town hall meeting in the Justice Department. There were about 200 lawyers there. We want to tell them what their role is in environmental justice, what their role is in presenting the interests of the American people. So you're going to be seeing more of our lawyers as we train them out there talking to you, because as we're shaping remedies, as we're discussing injunctive relief, whether it's in the context of a settlement, whether we're talking about supplemental environmental projects or in court litigating for enhanced injunctive relief to try to address some of the cumulative burdens, some of the disproportionate burdens. I met with corporate counsel group recently. You know what we spend almost the whole time talking about? Environmental justice. I told them they are your neighbors. They need to be good neighbors, and sometimes even just complying with the law. That's a good start, because that means Cynthia and I aren't going to knock on their door and tell them they're in non-compliance, but it's not everything. We've talked to them about doing more. Green technology, green jobs, they're retrofitting. We've told them they need to think about what the needs of the community are, engage in a conversation with their neighbors to see how they can conduct their business, which we all need. We need the jobs and we need the electricity and everything else, but conduct it in a way that is going to take into account public health and environmental protection. So I said to them, when we're talking about injunctive relief with you, looking forward, we're also going to be talking about enhanced injunctive relief. What more can you do so that you go beyond compliance? That's how we're trying to be the nation's environmental lawyers, and to make sure that we bring you into the conversation whenever we can through public outreach, not just putting a consent decree on a website, but more, so that we can hear from you, so that we can serve you in a better way.
One of the questioners mentioned Title VI, and I'm a recidivist. This is my second tour of duty at DOJ, and one of my first bosses was Deval Patrick, who used to say with great frequency that Title VI was the sleeping giant of civil rights laws, and I couldn't agree with him more. And we need, and we are taking very active steps to wake that sleeping giant up. And it's critically important for the federal government to do that, because as many of you know, the Sandoval decision in the Supreme Court made it a lot harder for private litigants to prove Title VI cases, because you can't bring a disparate impact claim. And that's essentially how you're going to be able to prove most of these cases. And so what that did was really heighten the importance of ensuring that we have the proper infrastructure in place in the various components of the federal government. USDOT, I'm very excited about the case that they did in connection with BART. They were, again, taking stimulus funds, and they were going to, without the requisite community impact studies that they were supposed to do, they were going hell-bent on putting that project in. And USDOT said no, using Title VI, and they put a big fat red light there. That's the type of robust Title VI enforcement that we need, and I commend my colleagues at DOT. We've had a lot of conversations about that, but we can and must do more. And a big part of what we're doing is building synergies. We are more embedded with our friends at EPA than ever before. We are more embedded with our colleagues at the environment section than ever before. And we are out in the community. We were out in Atlanta 10 days ago with EPA Region 4 with Ignacia. We were literally a half a mile from the Georgia Dome. You know, the Georgia Dome, I don't know how many hundreds of $1 million it cost to build that, but when I look at a game there now, I'll never be able to think about whatever game is going on. All I can think about is if you walk 2/3 of a mile from there, you find an African-American community where if you have a rainstorm, you're going to see raw sewage. That's all I can think about when I see the SEC title game. I don't remember who played. All I remember was I was half a mile from there 10 days ago, and that was unconscionable. So we are very focused on using Title VI and waking up that sleeping giant, and it involves building better synergies between all the relevant agencies. It involves understanding the impact of Sandoval, and it involves sustainability, making sure we have people in our requisite sections that can do the work. Some of you know my colleague, Daria Neal, who's in the back. I saw her a while ago. There she is, Darius, stand up. She's one of our most recent hires, stole her from the Lawyers Committee. She came and did a presentation shortly after my arrival about all the things we should be doing, and I thought, man, I'd like to have her implement all those things. So that's why she's with us. So I'm very, very happy that you brought up Title VI, because it is the sleeping giant, and we're going to wake it up.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that the rest of the panelists, we have some transportation experts who may want to address Dr. Wilson's issue, if they want to say anything about it, and Professor Ghana as well. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to make a quick point. As many of us in the room are old Title VI Federal Advisory Committee veterans. Hi, Bob. And I do think the Department of Transportation case was an important one, and it illustrated the use of Title VI at a critical leverage point. But we have yet to see a finding of disparate impact after an investigation administratively in a permitting context. And we've seen many of those cases brought, and they're difficult. I mean, I appreciate that that it takes time and attention to build the investigative and the regulatory framework there to investigate and adjudicate these matters and actually use a Title VI remedy. And we have yet to see that. But I think it's also important to note that beyond the enforcement context, we need to see environmental justice move upstream into rulemaking, into permitting, into planning, and this administration that has taken some important first steps to do that, and it's going to be a challenge doing that with the right level of specificity and doing that cognizant of the legal authorities, which of course is why this panel is here, to address legal authorities. And I just want to say, you know, from this side of the equation, I'm not an agency person, that there is an extensive body of literature out there on legal authorities. Several organizations that span the spectrum, from the Environmental Law Institute to NAPA to CPR, have all pointed to legal authorities. Legal scholarships have moved beyond the environmental area, have looked at these legal authorities in the land use, the natural resource, the energy, people investigating climate-related issues, the Native American communities have all looked at legal authorities, and the authority is there. It's not explicit. There's nothing in a statute that says environmental justice, but there's a lot of discretionary authority that is there, that has been identified, and we need an administration willing to use it. And I know that the challenges to do that are very, very difficult, and this administration has taken some really important steps to do that. We hope that continues when the going gets tough. We hope the administration doesn't retreat and will press forward and use some of these legal authorities. A lot of people have been living and working this issue for, 3 decades now. And we still get, you know, kind of caught up with those legal authorities. So I, for one, and I know a lot of people in the audience, don't always see what the agencies are doing behind the scenes, and so we would like to see that. You know, we will support you if your effort is genuine and if you press on, and I hope to hear, you know, what the agencies are doing behind the scenes, and thank you for being here.
Okay, Ms. Young, I know you've come a long way as well, and to share some remarks about.
Thank you. I'd like to just follow up on that a little bit, if I could. My agency is TriMet, which is the public transit agency in Portland, Oregon. We cover 3 counties. I just want to make a couple of points. Title VI, I think, is more important than ever because FTA seems to be paying attention. Title VI is a report that we file every 3 years. It's the Transit Justice Report that we have to document and analyze our routes, our schedules, our fares for disproportionate impacts. It doesn't always get very much attention. And I would encourage you to go back to your local communities and ask your transit district to provide you with a copy of the Title VI report. Because I know this year when we turned ours in, it was the first time we got a letter back from FDA that said, we'd like a little more information. We provided that. And then we heard that they're going to come out and do an audit. And we welcome that because we think that Title VI is very important and something that is a tool that can be used more and that could be an engagement tool for EJ advocates. But I do, since I didn't get my 2 minutes, want to make one other point, just stepping back to the bigger picture, that the biggest threat to transit justice in the country today is lack of funding. And in Portland, we tried everything we could to avoid service cuts, but this recession has taken a tremendous toll. And even after the salary freezes and laying off 140 people and cutting programs, we had to cut service by 14% over the last 2 years. And that has a very, very disproportionate impact on low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. And in my view, it's a national tragedy. And we're seeing transit being dismantled across this country. 80% of the transit properties are either cutting service or raising fares. And we need help on all levels of government to address this issue. On the federal level, we need a reauthorization bill. We need additional funding for infrastructure. We need to reconsider that the federal dollars shouldn't just go to infrastructure and capital improvements, that federal dollars should be able to offset operating costs as well. And in my view, that's a national EJ issue.
Mr. Dow, I know you want to
Yes.
follow up with that.
Thank
and
you
also
very much.
maybe
I
address some of the
appreciate that.
inequity issues. Yeah.
I'll join the ranks of the non-lawyer, and I am an agency person. And the message I want to bring to you in commenting on some excellent observations that have been made and questions that have been posed is I look at how we approach our mission utilizing those tools in the toolbox, Tom's point. They're very powerful tools, ranging from our ability to encourage and indeed enforce sound long-range planning at the beginning of the spectrum and sound project-level planning at the execution end of the spectrum. The President has raised rebuilding America's infrastructure in the context of rebuilding America's economy. He has elevated the need to invest in America's infrastructure at a higher level than has been done in decades. So the extent to which the resource question is addressed is obviously pending. The administration has made a very strong statement with regard to the need to pursue the development and passage of a long-term infrastructure investment program in this country, and obviously is anxious to work with Congress to see that done. He's elevated that issue on 2 successive holidays just this fall in a bipartisan way. But the tools we have in our toolbox have existed for a long time. The evolution of a body of law and programmatic leverage with respect to NEPA, the extent to which we have the ability to require states to develop state transportation improvement plans or in metropolitan areas transportation improvement plans, the extent to which we require them to obviously incorporate Title VI requirements as well as environmental justice principles to ensure that that history, that body of law, if you will, is incorporated on the ground in real terms with respect to transportation programs, community by community, state by state. So they're tools we all have to utilize. And I think we've demonstrated, certainly in the last couple of years, a very strong desire to utilize those tools effectively. whether it's Secretary LaHood's livability initiative, the Sustainable Partnership Initiative with EPA and HUD, the commitment to the relationship between availability of housing, availability of jobs, and availability of transportation, the linkage of that from a planning sense to a project development sense. All of that is essential. It's a function of good planning, good project development, and adherence to those principles and legal requirements that have developed over really the last 3 decades. So our department, I think, whether it's the Federal Highway Administration and my administrator, Victor Mendez, the level of commitment he brings to our agency, or Administrator Rogoff and FTA, and all of the operating administrations within USDOT, there's a significant commitment to utilizing those tools to ensure that these principles are executed on the ground within the programs. And we have a significant ability to do that. One last point. We cannot, however, do that effectively unless the public is engaged and involved at the local level. They say all politics is local. Well, all planning is local. There are tools available. The community needs to take advantage of that. Community impact is an absolute byproduct of what we do. Transportation, generally speaking, when you're improving assets, improving infrastructure, or developing operational strategies, it has a community impact, and the members of those communities must be engaged in figuring out how to mitigate that impact or deal with it. So there are tools. Let's take advantage of them, and we want to work with you to do so.
Right, thank you so much. I want to get over to this side of the room. Ms. Knaus, how about we'll give you the last word, okay? Great. Where's the microphone? Yeah, right there.
Hi.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, red hat.
All right. Yeah, I'm from the Turkey Creek community of coastal Mississippi. And actually, there are quite a few people here, both from the private sector and in government, who in one way or another have been involved in what's been going on there for the last decade and a half, including Darian Neal, who was our attorney when she was at the Lawyers Committee. Now, my community is in an interesting case because we hopefully have begun to round the corner from where the permitting, well, the planning, the permitting, and the enforcement nightmares that created a horrible situation are slowly transitioning into a community redevelopment segment of our history, which has some of the early signs of some of the good news that you hear in places like Spartanburg and what have you. But what I want to know, or what I want to say, I guess, is that in most communities, it's the planning, the permitting, and the enforcement that really has got people's hackles up, because there has not been any significant improvement as far as we can see on that pre-existing front. And you know, it's hard to think about and imagine and apply for grants for community redevelopment and green jobs and these types of things, or sustainability grants for your organization. When you're in the middle of that good news, there's repeated bad news. Even in Turkey Creek, which has become nationally known as, for some people, a success story. It's not a success story. It's a story that has begun to gain attention, and where we still get some ridiculous permitting requests and approvals made at the state level. And I also want to say, somebody that needs to be in this room and in this forum is the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Because on the Gulf Coast, across several states, okay, and I'm coming out of Hurricane Katrina, I'm coming out of Rita, I'm coming out of BP, I'm coming out of the engineering and the planning decisions that have made certain communities more vulnerable to the impacts. Quite honestly, government, and particularly in the form of the Army Corps of Engineers, has repeatedly been the offender. And so I'd like to know what kind of thoughts are there within the enforcement community about, I mean, it's hard enough to, you know, I've heard about how difficult it is to do the enforcement with the delegated authorities that the states have to do enforcement and all that. But what about when the problem is a federal agency? What do you do then?
Okay, thank you. We'll have 2 or 3 more questions.
My name is Michael Howard. I'm from Chicago, and I represent a community called Fuller Park, which is one of the smallest communities in Chicago. And a decade ago, we were deemed the most lead-poisoned community in Chicago. 2020 then did a story that listed us the 3rd most poisoned community in America, and no one did anything. And so we had to start a campaign of awareness to bring to bear solutions to the problem of our children's future being robbed from them for decades over this lead issue. But at the same time, we had to deal with being in the center of the city where we have one of the most largest transmodal hubs, because anything coming from California goes through Chicago to New York, and vice versa from New York to California, it goes through my neighborhood. And so air quality issues have been really a big concern of ours because we have to breathe so much diesel emission every day. And we worked for 3 years to finally get someone from the transportation department and the train owners that go through our neighborhood to respond to our complaints of noise pollution, which is 24 hours, air pollution, which is 24 hours, and basically what we were told in a nutshell, that it would take an act of Congress for them to do anything different from what they were already doing. So there was no concern over the pollution that was being thrust upon our community because of commerce. And so I'd like to speak to the issue of the fact that when do we start working on a policy from the policy level here in Washington, D.C., to change some of those policies that give certain industries so much power over a community for the sake of commerce. So when do we put people ahead of commerce, or when can we work together so that we can do commerce in a way that does not impact the health of 4 generations of a community, 5 generations of a community? And I think a lot of us are suffering under some type of EJ issue, whether it be air quality, lead, asbestos. It's unfortunate. My community has had all of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to recognize another very important person in the room who many of you should know, and that's Scott Fulton. He's the general counsel for EPA. Mr. Fulton, raise his hand and stand up, and so you all know that is the general counsel for the Environmental Protection Agency. Okay. I'll have, where is it? Okay. Yes.
Yes, I just want to follow on both of the gentlemen what they were just saying. You speak about rules and regulations and permits, and when you have a planning and development that in my community where I stay in Jacksonville, Florida, with planning and development, it's like basically a gentrification a process where the meeting starts at 9 o'clock in the morning, where people basically of color and people that have concerns about some of the planning issues are being made are at work. And I even made the effort to get some people to some of these early morning meetings, and when we got there, they, I guess, already was aware that, you know, the probability of a group of people that might want to cringe on what they're doing, and they only, by whatever law they had set in, was like you can only get 3 minutes for the whole group. So as far as permits and rules and regulations, we cannot continue to allow the municipality in our communities to set the agenda and, you know, and say, okay, this is what's going to be did, and we hear it on the 6 o'clock news, and it's a done deal.
Thank you. And one more, maybe we'll start the panel up again. Okay.
Comes on, can you hear me? Oh, good. I'm John Waterhouse, the Executive Director of the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council, and Dr. Fuller, I agree with your remarks. I listened to them, they're great. But I'd like to change the name to the Native American community. all of these issues you've talked to here today, we face in the Native American communities across the United States. Whether it's up in Alaska, where Toshiba's trying to put in a 4S reactor on the Yukon River, of all places, that experimental guinea pig thing, or down in the Navajo ranges where the uranium's mined for that, or over, I've just taken a tour all around the United States. Down in New Orleans, I was speaking to the Native American community down there about how Deepwater Horizon has affected and basically destroyed their lives. And then when it was capped, they don't hear from the, I'm going to be bad to you guys, they don't hear from the government anymore. They haven't heard a word. They can't get their phone calls answered. So environmental justice, I wonder. In the Michigan, Wisconsin area 2 years ago. Now this doesn't mean a lot to you folks here, I don't think, but the wild rice harvest did not happen. Why was that? Pollution. The chiefs decided no wild rice harvest. Where I live in Alaska, I flew down here last night. It's not very cold here, folks. Along the Yukon River, every year the king salmon season's crashing. That doesn't mean much to the restaurants here in D.C., but it certainly means a lot to the subsistence people that live along the Yukon River. I represent in the United States 53 tribes over in the Yukon Territory, 17 more First Nations. And I think on this environmental justice issue, not only should we be thinking about all these communities out here, but probably across our borders, because this does, we do need to collaborate with Canada and Mexico. These environmental issues, they come right across our borders. They don't care. They don't see that line in the sand. And I heard that you wanted to come and talk with us, so I'm going to give you my card.
Take it.
Come and sit around the campfire with us, and we can bring you up to date on what's happening in the Native American community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shall we pick up on some of these? Cynthia, do you want to?
Well, there's been so many important topics raised here. We can't get to all of them. One of the things that I think we've heard here is the commitment to the view that economic revitalization and environmental and health protection, we have to have both. And the communities want to make sure that while we are addressing recovery and economic strength, that we are also making sure that we address the human health and environmental conditions that help to make the communities resilient and strong. One of the things I've heard consistently throughout here is a concern about enforcement. I just want to echo what Ignacia said, that we are targeting and we are addressing our cases in a new way to try to get at environmental justice. Let me just give you two quick examples. A case where we brought a national case against a facility with many major air pollution sources, requiring the most stringent controls in the communities that are most overburdened and most affected by illegal pollution. Another case where there's talk about the sewer backups, where we worked with the city to make sure that they would get the raw sewage out of the communities first, that of the low-income communities that were most affected when there's stormwater and water pollution backups, and insisted that they make sure that they address those at the same time that they, in using their stormwater controls, that they revitalize and use green infrastructure to make the communities themselves better while they're addressing the environmental issues. And then another case where the company put a monitor in the community, so the community can know what is the air pollution to which they are exposed here, and that information is posted on the web, and make sure that that facility is complying with the law and that the community knows what's happening there. But I also take the point about moving upstream, and enforcement is at the end of the road. We need to make sure that the rules and the standards are set right to begin with. That's why EPA has been focusing on the reg writing. We issued a direction that all rules, all EPA rules, will consider environmental justice. And we're already seeing the results of that in specific decisions that the agency is making. They're going to play out in the many, many years ahead to protect communities from air and water pollution. And it's the reason why we're looking at permitting. So Plan EJ 2014, which has been mentioned here, that's why it focuses on these topics, to make sure that we look at the regs, that we look at the permits, that we look at enforcement, that we look at community-based action, that we understand that we got to meet the communities where they are, and we need to build from the community up, and also working with other federal agencies. So I'd be interested to hear more about your specific situation that you were referring to in your community about enforcement and what has happened or what isn't happening there that you think we should address, so I'm happy to talk to you about that after.
Basically, the Army Corps of Engineers is a self-policing agency. And it gives away permits, wetlands destroying permits, for instance, on the Gulf Coast of this country, like somebody selling hotcakes. And it is increasingly, it's, and then there's a disaster. And then so the Army Corps of Engineers, they cook up. The interesting thing here is that on the planning side, the Army Corps has great plans, but on the enforcement side, they basically run up against their own internal goals and policies for regional restoration by giving out these wetland permits, et cetera. And frankly, I mean, the Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for most of the deaths in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina because of Mr. Goat. And to my knowledge, I don't think the Army Corps has committed itself to a full restoration of that area to ensure sustainability and safety in the long term for the people of Lower Ninth Ward. And that's just one example across the Gulf Coast. Conan, Alabama, they permitted a wastewater treatment facility in a low-income community, in a surge zone, high-velocity surge zone, in a community that can't even tie into that service.
Okay, thank you.
And it just goes on and on.
Right. Did, Councilman Moreno? Yeah, tell us who you are.
Terry Blank, Kentucky for the Commonwealth, the Lions for Appalachia. Several weeks ago, we filed suit, notice of intent to sue for fraudulent DMR, discharge monitoring report. Over 20,000 violations of the Clean Water Act in the state of Kentucky. 20,000. That's looking at 3 coal operators in the state of Kentucky. And our governor is slapping them on the wrist with a $300,000 fine. We need the Department of Justice to step in and quit allowing the coal industry to poison our people. And I would have to agree with the gentleman with the Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers has permitted the destruction of Central Appalachia with valley fields. Our people are being poisoned with the water that's coming off of these valley fields, with selenium, arsenic, cadmium, the list goes on and on and on. We need the Department of Justice to step in and make sure that the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act is upheld in the state of Kentucky or across Central Appalachia. 20,000 Clean Water Act violations, and they got a smack on the wrist with $300,000 fine. And that's just the ones that we've looked at. We don't have the ability to pull every discharge monitoring report that has happened in the state of Kentucky. 20,000. And we need the Department of Justice to step in and make sure that the state of Kentucky is protecting its people like it's supposed to. And I don't want to be put off by saying, oh, but the Corps of Engineers issues the 404 or the state of Kentucky issues the 402. It is up to the EPA to make sure that the Clean Water Act is upheld in every part of its section, whether it's 303, 402, or 404. So thank you.
Could you respond?
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for coming. I know we've had several conversations about the importance of making sure that the energy extraction activities that happen in Appalachia, but also in elsewhere in the country, are done in a way that protects health and the environment. We are working aggressively on this problem, as I think that as we've many times discussed, including setting standards and working closely with the Corps and with Office of Surface Mining to make sure that the permitting that is done in accordance with the Clean Water Act. I can't.
Things are changing on the ground. It's changing here in Washington, D.C. You're telling us it's changing, but it's not happening on the ground, and it's not happening and helping the people in the community. It needs to come. It has to trickle down.
You mentioned the Department of Justice, and just so that we're all, we have the same information, I'll say something you probably already know. We get cases referred from the Environmental Protection Agency. Cynthia tells me that she's aware of, and they're working on the issue that you raised. She and I are going to be talking more about this. When a case like this comes to us, we're going to be on it. we have a pipeline of cases. I mean, they've been referring cases to us. We've been working together to make sure that in that pipeline of cases that we're addressing critical issues. And you mentioned Appalachia and Kentucky, and I'm glad you did, because it is a priority area for me. It is something that I'm focused on, and in fact, I've talked to the U.S. attorneys, a number of U.S. attorneys in Appalachia, because I want to work with them to address some of the water issues that you mentioned. The issues that you raised, I heard almost the exact same scenario discussed by the U.S. attorneys in West Virginia. I talked to all of them. We sat down and we had a conversation about this, and they've sent me some information which we've shared with our colleagues at EPA, because they want us to come down there. They want us to come into the communities. They want us to talk to people. They want to have a role in this enforcement. The Attorney General was here earlier. One thing he didn't mention, which is really important, that happened recently, was that the U.S. attorneys, all 94 of them, with 2 people in tow from each office, came together for the first ever environmental enforcement conference. And the Environment Division participated, as did a lot of the folks here, Scott, Cynthia, and people at agencies across the government. Because, you know, some of us enforce and some of us are agencies that we also defend. And that's the point that I wanted to come back to in a moment, what we do on the defensive side. But the Attorney General was very specific. His speech was about environmental justice, and I spoke at the conference, and my speech was about environmental justice. And I've gotten a lot of phone calls coming out of that conference saying, what can we do together? So we are focused on what you're talking about in the critical water issues in Appalachia. Now, I am going to ask for some partnership and some patience. You're right. This needs to hit the ground. You need to see something in your communities. You need to see what it is that we're going to do. So we have to get there, okay, which makes it really important that we have sustainability. I said at the beginning that I started working on environmental justice in February 1994. Okay, we did a lot of work on guidance at the Justice Department, and a colleague reminded me that in the Environment Division, and I was out in the field on this case. I mean, we went up and down the U.S.-Mexico border. I was in the communities. We brought one of the earlier environmental justice cases, a safe drinking water case. So he was reminding me about that. But we left, okay, the Clinton administration left. I was there 7 years. We had a hard time locating the guidance on a website. Patrice personally went looking for it, and it's like, where is this? And I spoke to, my friend Bernice here and others. I had an early, it was the first meeting I ever had in the department with folks from outside was the environmental justice leaders. And they told me they hadn't been in the building for 9 years. Well, we're working really hard to get to the communities, and more importantly, to make this work sustainable, which is why Cynthia and I have been talking about how do we do cases so that it's not Cynthia and I just talking about that, but when we leave a line attorney in the environmental enforcement section or in natural resources or wherever they are, they're going to be doing environmental justice. They're going to be doing those 2 things I talked about. They're going to be focused on these issues because we come and go on the political level, but you really need to have the people that are going to be there, which is why I always introduce people to the career people who are going to keep carrying this banner. It's been a long time that folks have been suffering with these burdens, and it's going to take some time to turn that big, that big vessel of all of this. It's going to take time, but we have the commitment, and we have a window, which is why we really I'm going to speak for myself, but I think I can say we love coming and talking to you. The best way to get something done is get everybody together. I mentioned corporate America earlier. We need them to be part of the solution and the conversation too. Okay, so real quick, so I don't hog this up. On defensive cases, trust me, we advise our client agencies on NEPA. You want to come and get a good defense from the Environment Division, we're going to ask you some hard questions as a client agency. We're going to make sure you complied with the law. That includes NEPA. We're talking to folks about the CEQ's guidance, environmental justice guidance, to address NEPA issues. We're having those conversations. Sometimes we're telling our agencies that maybe it's best if they settled, maybe it's best if they go back and take another look. So we're not afraid to have those conversations, and that's a role we can play. But they're also very interested. I mean, I know we talked to the Army Corps. Roxalt is here. He's a colleague of mine. We talked to the Department of Transportation and the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. And I know, at least in the folks in this administration, there's commitment on environmental justice. We have to figure out what we can do. On Deepwater Horizon, we're on it. I know somebody asked about that and said, we forgot you. We haven't forgotten you. We are on it, what we can do from the Justice Department side. Tribal issues, we just came, Tom and I, from a meeting with tribal nations leaders that the Justice Department's group that put together. The Attorney General put this group together. The Attorney General told the Assistant Attorneys Generals, we need to engage, we need to listen, and we need to figure out how we set priorities together. And transboundary pollution issues, absolutely. It's in the border communities. I mean, we have a northern border and a southern border, but border communities, colonias, really suffer with some of these cross-boundary impacts. And so we are focused on that too. The final thing I'll say is that another area we're looking at is national security. There's a lot of national security border activity with the construction of the fence, and we are looking to see how do you get information out in English and in Spanish? How do you address herbicide issues that are, herbicides that are being used to make protection of the border easier? Communities are impacted, and we're working in some cases, defending cases, but working solutions in the context of the defense that are going to be a real benefit back to communities. Sorry that I said all that, but I wanted to just at least highlight that these are all important issues.
Okay, we have a lot of still questions left. If people would just refrain and ask a question related to what this panel can answer. And I know that Mr. Fulton from EPA also wants to say a few words about some of the activities they're doing. And so I lost track of where the microphone is. I know in the middle there, because we have to come back this way. We need the mic because I'm trying to record this. So.
Hi, I'm Edith Pittston, and I'm with the state of Connecticut. The Department of Justice used to have these wonderful regional offices that were excellent at providing mediation between parties. They would come in, bring the parties that were having problems, whether it included the state, the municipality, and the local community, and they would make a list of all the concerns the community had, and then they would present that list to whatever entity was in charge or had the authority. And I can tell you that without one piece of litigation, just having the Department of Justice presence coming in is significant in leveraging and, intimidating people into doing the right thing. You almost have to act like you're like the big mom. You're coming in here and saying, this is not right what you're doing. You're breaking the law. How are you going to get along better with Kentuckians? How are you going to do that? And it worked beautifully. Do you have a plan in bringing those regional offices back?
Tom, do you want to take this one?
I don't know if you were referring to the Community Relations Service, because the Community Relations Service is still around, and we're doing a lot of work in New Orleans on policing, for instance, and CRS does a lot of work collaboratively with us in that area. They have a mediation arm, so they've done that, and perhaps one thing I will do in following up on this is send an email to Becky Monroe, who is the acting head of the agency, to let her know that there's someone from Kentucky who wants to talk to you. And I will do that.
Okay, Mr.
Kentucky.
Yeah, Kentucky.
I'm sorry, Connecticut. Connecticut. Yeah.
Okay. We are now going into the break time. All right? So just letting you all know, okay? And we have a few more questions, and we have Mr. Folden and Mr. Stanislaw wants to say a few words. So quickly, Mr. Folden. Come on.
Hi, folks. And knowing that I'm standing between this moment and your break, I'll be very, very brief. I just wanted to agree with the comments that were stated earlier about the reach of the available legal authorities to address this issue. We've been looking at this question and do believe that there are authorities available that have not yet been deployed or have not yet been effectively deployed to address some of these concerns. We very much appreciate the passion and frustration that's present in some of the sharing here today, and I think it's imperative that you hold your government accountable for forward movement on this issue. A word of hope that I would register with you is that having been one that has seen this issue over the decades from the government perspective, I can say that never before has there been a concentration of energy and commitment behind this question as we see today. And in our own discussions within the Environmental Protection Agency, we've recognized that the moment for this issue, environmental justice, the idea of being committed to a path that ensures an equal distribution of environmental benefits and burdens in this country is now. The moment is now. If we, as the Obama administration, are not able to figure out how to administer environmental protection in a manner that ensures an equal distribution of quality, then I don't know who will. So, so the invitation is continue to push us, press us, and hold us accountable, but also would request that one thing that we don't find ourselves talking about too much, and there may be a value in it if we could lift it up a little bit, are circumstances in which good things happen or where folks have figured out how to do it right, particularly at the state and local government arenas. If we had some best practices that began to emerge so that in addition to trying to address the problem of the day, we're trying to export the best emerging thinking about how to manage these practices. That would be of great value and assistance to us, and you folks who are on the ground and seeing this have a window into that that's far superior to anything that we have.
Thank you. And then we're going to have a few words and then maybe a couple more questions.
So I'll just be real quick, and I want to thank you all for coming. And you know, what I've done, what the administrator has done, what the administration overall has done is ask ourselves the hard questions every day. From the day that I've been in my office, you know, I harass my staff every day. What are we doing on environmental justice? And frankly, having worked on environmental justice on the other side, change can never happen quickly enough. But one thing I can tell you, my commitment, the administrator's commitment, everyone at the table here today, is that every day, we're operationalizing into our decision-making framework the ways that we can change our decisions, the way that we can quantify environmental justice, provide the scientific rigor, provide a legal framework to make decisions. Because frankly, if that doesn't happen, environmental justice is not going to be achieved. You know, I've been working on environmental justice since the executive order. And the question is, why has it not moved forward as quickly as you'd want? Because we need to put in place the foundation framework for making decisions. So there are things that I have done. For example, the area-wide planning program is designed around environmental justice because it recognizes that EJ communities that have been left behind, you can't look at properties alone. You have to look at the surrounding conditions, look at the history of disinvestment. You know, if you're going to bring communities to the table in an authentic way, we have to integrate that into our decision-making framework. So I have a community engagement initiative to operationalize authentic communities' role in the decision-making. And again, I want to underscore into the decision-making, because frankly, there has been a dichotomy about the community voice versus decision-making. So we're trying to marry the authentic voices to so that it can really effectuate decisions. And so I just want to close to say, this is not the beginning, this is the middle of an ongoing process. And I just want to underscore what Scott said. Continue to hold us accountable. Continue to put specific demands on the table so we can respond to that. Thank you.
Can you all stay for a few more minutes? Okay. I know Ms. Blanco had her in for a while, and Vernice, and then the gentleman back there, and the lady in the pink, in the blue. Yeah. Go. Okay. Yeah.
I think.
Thank you. My name is Elodia Blanco, and I'm an advisor with the Gulf Coast Fund. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I know that this panel will do some follow-up, and I've listened very carefully. I'm from New Orleans, and my community was on top of a toxic landfill. One of my concerns is that in your follow-up, would you consider putting together across the country, from California to New England, a panel of community leaders? We're volunteers. We don't have to be paid. And we're asking that you put together these people to come together with you, to talk to you on a community level. Because we don't want just to have a seat at the table. We want to have our voices heard. We want to be included in a lot of the decisions that are being made. So as a follow-up to this meeting, would you please consider putting together a community panel, a community group, or a task force of leaders so that we can, on enforcement, so that we can get our voices heard, and so that you know some of the concerns of the things that are actually going on within the community. Because from what I'm hearing, yes, you're given cases like Ms. Ignacia said, but a lot of the cases you don't even know about. A lot of the issues that are taking place within the communities you all don't know about. So this is an opportunity, and I applaud the fact that you're bringing us here today, because in the past administrations, we weren't even in the room.
Thank you.
Okay?
We'd be happy to follow up with you to talk further about the enforcement issues.
Okay,
I think I have the next.
I'm sorry, we really.
Hilton,
Go ahead, go.
Hilton, I have the mic. Hilton,
Yeah.
I'll make it really quick. I just want to say that I think some of the tension that you feel in the room is not because people don't deeply appreciate what this administration has done, but the commitment that you have is not a delegated commitment that's shared by many state and local agencies. And that's where the frustration is. So I wanted to make sure that you didn't walk out of this room, and that the folks in CEQ and EPA who worked so hard to bring us together today don't feel like we are kicking you in the butt and saying, you know, you brought us here on a 20-degree day, and what the hell was that about? You know? That's not what we're saying. What we're saying, and I'll just give you one brief example. I live and work in the state of Maryland, a very progressive state with a progressive governor and yada, 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 yada. And I come from the NEJAC meetings where we're all fired up about what the agency is doing. And then I meet with the Maryland Department of the Environment. I'm like, are y'all in the same conversation? Are you connecting? Do you read the stuff that EPA puts on their website? Do you know what they're talking about in terms of integrating into permitting and enforcement actions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? The answer would be no. And this is a really progressive place that wants to do good things. So, but then you look at a state like South Carolina, where they are doing really dynamic things with a little bit of money. So you need to go out and work with your state agencies and local agencies and train them about where it is you're trying to go. Because if you don't take them with you, we are going to be back here in the next administration, the administration after that, saying they keep issuing the freaking permits. They got to stop. And the only way that they stop is if you educate them about the existing legal and statutory authorities, the ways that they have that they can grapple with these issues, but they got to do it. Because if we have to keep coming back here having this conversation, you're going to hear our frustration. And we don't mean to be disrespectful. We just want you to know that it's not changing on the ground. And you guys have the power to make it change on the ground.
Thank you. We have to end.
My name is Hilton Kelly. I'm with the Community Empowerment Development Association in Port Arthur, Texas, on the Gulf Coast. And I would just like to say kudos to Lisa Jackson and the administration for putting together the Environmental Protection Agency grassroots EPA showcase community, simply because even though it's just getting started, Port Arthur was selected as an EPA Showcase Community. We're trailblazing this thing, but what it has done, it has brought industry together with local community groups, and it also have brought together the local government as well. So now we're collaborating at least, even though we still have many issues, but the dialogue has started, so let's try and do that across the nation.
Thank you. Please thank the panel. Thank you for all your great participation. Thank you very much.